Hello everyone, I just wanted to make a quick little video on some of my favorite books in my little book collection that I have. I like to have these books more so in actual physical copies because I personally feel like I love my Kindle, but I just feel like a book on the Kindle is not always the same as having the actual physical book, especially if there's photos. The first book that I said I will be talking about is Vampira, Dark Goddess of Horror. It's by W. Scott Poole. Don't know if I'm saying his last name right. I hope so. If not, I'm very sorry. This book is from Amazon. My boyfriend actually got it for me a couple years ago for my birthday. Vampira, Dark Goddess of Horror is actually about Mila Nurmi's life, and Mila Nurmi is actually the woman that ended up being and playing Vampira. I really enjoyed this book because it is all about Mila's life from when she was little to when she grew up and when she started working in Hollywood, and obviously it's very focused entirely on her Vampira character. The book really goes to explain a lot about how the Vampira character was created, the impact that the Vampira character had during that time, as well as the lasting impact that the Vampira character has still had to this day. As I've mentioned in a lot of my videos before, there's like so many things that we owe to Vampira and we just wouldn't have them, like so many characters, movies, a lot of even comics that we would not have if it wasn't for Vampira and the creation of her character. This book also goes into kind of the unfortunate downfall of the Vampira character. Just a little backstory. Essentially, Mila, aka Vampira, essentially was kind of blacklisted and shunned from Hollywood, which you'll learn more about if you read this book or if you research her. Talks a lot about her relationships with James Dean, Elvis, among many others during that time period, kind of the Hollywood glamour era. The book also talks a lot about Mila's, impact and Vampira's impact on culture at that time. If you can imagine, this was in the 1950s, so it was totally different in many ways than how it is now, especially with the gender norms and society expectations. At that time, Vampira was like extremely dark and out of the ordinary, especially for TV as well. Based on this book, Mila knew exactly what she was doing by creating the Vampira character. She was looking to kind of push some boundaries, and I feel like she wanted to make some statements about what was going on in American society at that time, as well as pop culture. The book also talks a lot about sexuality in the 1950s, and once again, how Vampira's character played into that, and there's just a lot of information, and I really recommend the book if you don't know a lot about Vampira, or even if you do know a lot about her. So the Vampira book, like I said, has some photos in it also. This is one of my favorite ones in the book. It's saying that she is the nightmare of Hollywood. This is another one of my favorite photos in the book. It's Vampira filming Plan 9, which was directed by Ed Wood, which is a pretty interesting movie. The next book I have is The Haunted Mansion, Imagineering a Disney Classic. This is from Halloween Town in Burbank. So clearly I love Disneyland and Disney World, and The Haunted Mansion is definitely one of my favorite rides there. This book goes through the creation of the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland. It touches a little bit on it in Disney World. The ride definitely had to be changed around when they brought it to other markets, especially most notably Disneyland Paris and Hong Kong Disneyland, just because the cultures are very different and what works here wouldn't necessarily work over there. This book basically has a lot of artwork of the plans that they came up with for the initial Haunted Mansion and how many times they had to change the plans. It also talks a lot about how interested Walt was in this project, and it's one of the last projects that he actually worked on, and unfortunately he passed away before the ride was ever completed. He never got to see the ride. Never, and it's kind of sad in a way. I mean, obviously it's sad, but it's one of the most iconic rides at Disneyland or even at any of the Disney parks, and he has no idea. The book also just includes a lot of photos and information from the Imagineers that worked on the project at the time, and it covers Disneyland Paris version, which is called Phantom Manor, and Hong Kong Disneyland's version, which is called Mystic Manor. Also has a little section on Haunted Mansion Holiday, which you should be familiar with if you've been to Disneyland anytime. I think it starts when September through January. You will know exactly what it's talking about. If not, then you'll learn. Basically, I just really enjoyed learning all about the different versions of the Haunted Mansion that they were trying to come up with, and just all the different ideas that the different Imagineers had. There was a lot out there, but I think what they settled on was probably the best. Here's just a little bit inside of the artwork from the Haunted Mansion book. This just shows how different some of the early designs and thoughts that people had about the Haunted Mansion were. As I said, also, Disneyland Paris and Hong Kong Disneyland have totally different versions of the Haunted Mansion ride, and this is Hong Kong Disneyland's version, Mystic Manor. This is the Addams Family in Evolution. It's also from Halloween Town in Burbank. So this book has over 200 of the original Addams Family comics. It actually also has the first ever published Addams Family comic inside of it. Besides the comic, this book also has like a lot of information on the development of the Addams Family, and it has information on the characters and how the characters were developed. This book is also really interesting because it just shows a lot how the Addams Family evolved over time, and it kind of shows you how different the movies are from the comics, and even how different kind of the TV show was, but it shows how they all tie in together and how they all grew out of the comics. This is the first Addams Family comic that I mentioned that was published. It's Morticia and Lurch and the Thing in the top corner before he was in movies and was made to be just a hand. As you can see, Morticia is a little different looking in the later comics, and like I said, Lurch is entirely different at this point. This is one of my other favorite books that I have. It's The World of Lore, Monstrous Creatures by Aaron Mahnke. Hope I said his name right also. This is based off of a podcast, actually. I think I found out first about his podcast from Comic-Con in New York. This book covers monstrous creatures just like it says, and since it's called The World of Lore, essentially, it goes through the stories that gave us some of our monsters and kind of horror-related creatures that we know and have today. I especially like learning about the vampire section in this book. I learned about the Mercy Brown incident when I read this book, which is super crazy. I thought that was really interesting to learn about, as well as the story of Robert the Doll, which was kind of just creepy, but it was a good read too. This book has a lot of artwork in it as well, and I'll show some of the pages that are in it too, but there's a bunch in here. As I mentioned also with my lore books, they have some artwork in it, and I mentioned a little about Robert the Doll and how I liked his story, so this is his story and a little drawing of him. There's just a lot of artwork on this book in general, and this section I also really like too because it's more about the history of seances. I have the second book that was in that series, which is called The World of Lore, Wicked Mortals. So Wicked Mortals follows the same theme of monstrous creatures, kind of haunty, spooky, macabre, but this time it's about wicked mortals, so actual real people. Again, this one has artwork throughout it too. My favorite story in this one is Burke and Hare. Also covers a story of H.H. Holmes, which some of you may be familiar with and some of you may not be. And his story is also pretty wild too, like it's wild. So this definitely is full of wicked mortals for sure. This is the Lore Wicked Mortals book, and as I mentioned a little about the grave robbers Burke and Hare, this is an illustration of them robbing a grave. Both the lore books I also got on Amazon. I don't remember if I mentioned that, but you can get them on Amazon. Grimm's Complete Fairy Tales collection by the Brothers Grimm. I got this at Costco and I was really, really excited and kind of surprised in a way to find this there, but I had to get it. So this version has over 200 stories because, like it says, it's the complete fairy tale collection, and it's not the kind that we read when we were kids that were kind of watered down or done by Disney. I love fairy tales probably because I grew up with them, and also as a child I definitely had a lot of the Brothers Grimm books with illustrations, obviously the kid-friendly version, so getting to read the darker, kind of gruesome, not watered down versions has been really fun. As you can see, the book's pretty big. I'm not even halfway done yet, so I've got a lot more reading to do, but I think the gold pages are gorgeous. and just the engraving on the book, everything. So far, my favorite stories definitely are Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, and Little Red Cap in here. This is a book on the poems of Edgar Allan Poe with illustrations by W. Heath Robinson. I really enjoy Edgar Allan Poe's work, so I was really excited to get this book. It's also from Halloween Town. This book has some of his classics like The Conqueror Worm and The Raven, so it's been a really enjoyable read, and having the beautiful illustrations there really helps bring the poems to life, I think so. This is my classic horror tales book. I got it in Sleepy Hollow, New York, like Washington Irving Sleepy Hollow. I was there 2 Halloween seasons ago, so I ended up picking this up there, and I was really excited to get it. As you can see, this is a pretty big book as well. It has over 30 short-ish stories in it from authors such as Bram Stoker, H.P. Lovecraft, and Edgar Allan Poe, so there's kind of a big variety in there, but obviously all horror, dark related. Favorite stories in here is definitely Dracula's Guest, and I love The Telltale Heart. That's one of the first stories in here. The last book I'm going to share is Damnation Island by Stacey Horn, and this book is also from Amazon. So this book is actually about Roosevelt Island in the 1800s, but then it was referred to as Blackwell Island, and on that island at that time, there was an insane asylum, an almshouse. I think there were 2 prisons, and there were a few hospitals there. As you can imagine, based off of that, it kind of seems like they were just throwing everyone in that island. As you can see under the title, it says Poor, Sick, Mad, and Criminal in 19th Century New York, because they were literally throwing everyone on that island. At that time, it was very easy to get thrown into the insane asylum, and it was nearly impossible to get out. This book talks about like some individual stories, and it also talks about some journalists that went undercover at that time because they hoped to expose the really poor, terrible living conditions that people were suffering from here. The people in the asylum were treated pretty poorly, like they were beat by doctors and nurses. The patients beat each other. There was a lot of murder going on inside. The book really shows just how much, I guess, the system that is supposed to help you can really fail you and hurt you more in the long run. And it kind of relates to even now, because I know still with mental health, a lot of stuff still isn't helping people, and a lot of people are still suffering the same issues that were going on in the 1800s, which is just wild. Anyways, really good book. That's pretty much my book collection that I have going on inside my apartment. Again, they're not necessarily my favorite books of all time, but they are my favorite books that I have in here. I tend to more so physically buy books that are in the horror, spooky, haunted, creepy realm. I just feel like they fit my apartment, so I like having them here. I usually have them out on a display. Thanks for watching the video, and let me know if you have any other ideas on videos you would like to see. As I said, it's a little tough right now because of everything that's going on. I'm limited to my apartment, and it's only so big, but totally open to any ideas. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed seeing just some of my little spooky book collection.